not a place your mercy and grace will find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing that's better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You turn beauty to ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn grace. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You turn graves. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. 'Cause there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing that's better than you. Oh, we say, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing that's better than you. And we say, Jesus, oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing that's better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see his wounds, his hands, his feet, Savior on the cursed tree. Body bound and drenched in tears, they laid him down in Joseph's tomb, the entrance sealed by heavy stone. Messiah still, all oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. On the third, at break of dawn, the Son of Heaven rose again. Oh, trample death, where is your sting? angels roar, for Christ the King. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise His name forevermore. For endless days we will sing Your praise. Oh Lord our God. Oh, praise His name. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise His name forevermore. For endless days we will sing Your praise. Oh Lord our God. Shall return in robes of white. The blazing sun shall pierce the night, and I will rise among the saints and praise Jesus' face. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise His name forevermore. For endless days we will sing Your praise. Oh Lord our God, oh, praise the name. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise His name forevermore. For endless days we will sing Your praise. Oh Lord our God. Oh Lord our God. Sing the chorus once more. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise His name forevermore. For endless days we will sing Your praise. Oh Lord our God. God, how beautiful Your holy word, that formed the worlds in such goodness. Oh, the shame that we would spurn it all, to turn and fall into darkness. We'll sing how through Your Son You turned this loss and hurt into glory. When scorned and death You raised Him up, His gains become the whole world's soul. Let all things rise. Let all things rise and bless Your name. All things made right and new again. Oh Lord our God, Your goodness is free and goodness is free and endless through the Lord. every step we take. Your faithfulness is our portion. Prepared a city bright and fair, whose gates forever stay open. Son of God, Son of God, in you we take it up, the way of love's occupation. The joy to share in your reward, the starting turn of new creation. Let all things rise. Let all things rise and bless your name. All things made right and new again. Oh Lord our God, your goodness is free and boundless, reaching endless through it all. Just as you promised. Just as you promised, God, your Son was raised up. In him we'll follow, in him we'll all be raised up. Just as you promised, just as you promised, God, was raised up. In him we'll follow, in him we'll all be raised up. Let all things rise, bless your name. All things made right, you again. Endless through. Oh Lord, you made yourself a home, heaven and earth forever one. All things have shown your weakness, you raise and promise. Beauty arches above. Are you hurting and broken within, overwhelmed by the weight of sin? Jesus is calling. Have you come to the end of yourself? Do you thirst for a drink from the well? Jesus is calling. Come to the altar, the Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Leave behind your regrets and mistakes. Come today, there's no reason to wait. Jesus is calling. Bring your sorrows and trade them for joy. From the ashes a new life is born. Jesus is calling. Come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus. Oh come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was born with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, so precious. Oh, Jesus. Oh, what a Savior. Isn't he wonderful? Sing hallelujah, Christ is risen. Sing before him, for he is Lord of all. Sing hallelujah, Christ is risen. Oh, what a Savior. Oh, what a Savior. Isn't he wonderful? Sing hallelujah. Christ is risen. Bow down before him. We bow before you now. For he is Lord of all. Sing hallelujah. Christ is risen. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was born with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, come to the altar. Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, Jesus. Oh, look to you. Thank you. Thank you. You are risen, risen indeed. You are risen, risen indeed. Thank you for the cross. Savior, isn't he wonderful? Sing hallelujah, Christ is risen. We bow down before him, for he is Lord of all. Sing hallelujah, Christ is risen. Oh, what a Savior. Isn't he wonderful? Sing hallelujah, Christ is risen. Bow down before him, for he is Lord of all. Sing hallelujah, Christ is risen.
If I haven't seen you over recent times, it's because Fran and I have been on a holiday overseas, but if you're visiting and I haven't seen you before and we've just spoken to people who may just check in on our Facebook Live feed, it is just such a pleasure to be together today. And as Fraser said, please consider yourself just for the day to be part of family, sort of to kind of help yourself to whatever you need to and to feel like you're welcome and you're together with us today. As I say, I've just been in Japan. We have our daughter-in-law is from Nagasaki in Japan, and so Fran and I, they took our grandson away, and so we had to go over there just to be with him for a long period of time. Some of you will know what that feels like and what it is, and so our daughter-in-law took this photo. I couldn't kind of find a photo that looked like it was in Japan. All of the others could have been in Beach Haven and just kind of skiving off or something like that. So she's not in there, but sort of the other important people are in there, sort of in some sort of Japanese place over the time. And so we just had this magnificent time with our son Elliot, who took holiday during that time. He's working over there, and so we were with him and with our baby and with Aya for all of those for 2 weeks, and just had this magnificent time. And I'll reflect on that a little as we go through this morning. I did want to say welcome. I'm not sure whether they might have all filtered out, but anyone who's normally in Seek, recognise that you would normally be out doing something really cool with Carly. But instead you can do something really cool with me. But it's I just encourage you just to zone in and zone out, and I would be pretty confident. That's what your parents do anyway. They zone in and zone out. I see it in their eyes. And just trust that the things that you zone into are worthwhile thinking about. So I think that's not a bad way to be in church. It's like, okay, I remember that might be something that God has. I just think it's a fantastic way to be. So he is risen. He's risen indeed. He's risen. He is risen indeed. We get to celebrate, don't we? I do love Easter Sunday. It seems to go past in such a fleeting time. I mean, we get to celebrate all the time, of course, but, Lent is a long time. It goes for 6 or 7 weeks, and there's this process of Lent, and then there's Good Friday, and you get to kind of explode almost out of that process into an Easter Sunday. I do love Easter Sunday. Most colourful shirt on today. There's something about sort of wearing something coming out of that thing. To do it, I don't, usually it's just the one that doesn't smell or something like that. I'm not particularly, but today I chose colour because I think that's what we want to be thinking about and be part of on a Sunday. So we're going to be talking out of Luke 24 today. Would love you to turn there. Some of you might have read it already because we let it be known from the pastor's email. So grab your phones and stuff like that, or if you've got an app or you've got a Bible or something like that. I'm not going to be reading it all. It's 53 verses, but I hope I can do a little bit of justice and tease you a little that you might choose to read it, or you might choose to pick something out of it, or you might the rest of the holiday. That's my ambition. It's not to kind of create a complete message today, because there's so much in it, and I think what God will want to do in your life, let's just trust him for that. So in Luke chapter 24, there are sort of 4 different themes really that come through. The first theme in the first 12 verses the theme of the empty tomb. And so you start with some women who arrive. It's important that they're women. So there's a couple of Marys, there's Joanna, and they arrive with spices for this body. And they arrive at the tomb, and the tomb is empty, and there are a couple of angels there, and they're confused. And the angels, kind of really powerfully, I think, say, why are you looking for the living among the dead? And they say, he is not here, he is risen. And that's what we get to say. That's what we sort of say in church on an Easter Sunday. He is not here. He is risen, which is a magnificent thing. And they're so excited that they go back and tell the 11. And guess what? Those stupid men, they say, well, we don't even believe it. And so Peter runs to the tomb and he finds in verse 12 this empty tomb as well. The tomb is empty. This is incredible news. So that's the first part of Luke chapter 24. Then you have a part of Luke, the longest of chapter 24, is what we call the road to Emmaus. There's two people, probably a couple, walking away from Jerusalem to Emmaus, which is about 10 kilometers away from Jerusalem, and they're disconsolate, they're devastated. This Jesus, the idea that they had that was going to happen, has just fallen apart because this Jesus has been crucified and he's now dead. And the stranger comes up and they begin to have a conversation. They're amazed that the stranger doesn't even know what's happened, and he starts to talk to them, and there's this crucial sort of fork in the road moment where they're going to go to their place and Jesus is going to move on, but it's the end of the day, and they invite him in, and they end up breaking bread together. And in the breaking of the bread, their eyes are open and they recognize him. It's like they've been with him all this time, but then all of a sudden their eyes open and they recognize him. Again, a most powerful thing. And then he opens the scriptures to them and he talks to them and he says, this is why it happened. All happened as it was, and this is how it makes sense together. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. If you haven't read it ever, or if you haven't read it recently, it would be a great thing to be reading this afternoon with a cup of coffee in the sun or something like that. And then you have the sightings of Jesus from verses 36 to 49. And it says somewhere else, I think Paul writes, 500 people and 10 or 11 different sightings, which I think is really important because it's really important to me that the tomb is empty. And it's really important to me that Jesus is evidenced in the community and in society. And you have all of these sightings of Jesus, and Jesus starts just turning up sort of at random in between verses 36 to 49. And it's really sort of horizontal. It's really sort of fleshy and touchy-feely. And he says, kind of, look at my hands and my feet, kind of, it's me. Why don't you touch me? Why don't you feel me? And elsewhere you have the great story of Thomas, who's not there at that time, saying, well, you might have seen it, but I still don't believe. And Jesus turns up again. And doubting Thomas gets the opportunity to feel and touch and see. And then it moves on to this other really human thing. He says, well, he doesn't say I'm hungry, but he sort of what is there to eat? And then they have some fish, and he eats the fish, and you have this amazing sort of meal that takes place, and Jesus is in their midst, and it's an incredible thing that's happening. And then he opens the scriptures to them and he explains the story, and their eyes begin to open also along the way. And then tucked in right at the end, you have the ascension. Jesus sort of goes towards Bethany, and it says he lifts up his hands and blesses them. And while he was blessing them, he's taken up to heaven. And in verse 52, the response, then they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy. What a story. I mean, what a heart-stopping, kind of compelling story, no matter how often you read it. He is risen. He is risen indeed. It's my favorite Sunday today. I mean, it's an odd Sunday because it's also holiday, so lots of people are away, and, kind of bless you guys who are on holiday at various times. It's an odd Sunday, I think, because it's like, well, it's a story we kind of know. It's a Sunday that it's easy, kind of ho-hum Easter Sunday. Yeah, I did it last year, and I'll probably do it next year. But I'm not sure, it's almost like familiarity with the story is not our enemy, but something that we have to be aware of. in the context of an Easter Sunday. If you Google search Easter Sunday images, which is kind of what probably pastors usually do, what do I do on Easter Sunday? Because I've done it for the last 30 years and I don't want to do it last year, because there is a chance that somebody remembers what I said last year, even though I may not remember it myself. But anyway, if you Google images, this is the front page of what you get. And it's kind of, I want to say, corny, and yet it's powerful in its own right. But you've seen those images before, and sort of, kind of, diffused light and sort of empty crosses and sort of, Jesus's robe over, or, kind of over the cross and stuff like that. It's sort of churchy, isn't it? And sort of, kind of as I Google that, it's like somehow, in a sense, it diminishes me rather than it enhances me in the process. So I don't know that we do the glorious thing. I mean, we chose as our image for today, in a sense. I love this. It's sort of, it has something of the combination, I think, of that traditional thing that we might see, but it's this fierce orange ball is about to come over the horizon and be our source of warmth and light, and there's something coming, and to me it's like something's coming out of the cave, something's coming out of the grave. And we just know the inevitability of it. That's my heart behind that. You may or may not see that in that, but that's kind of what I'm feeling with an Easter Sunday. So I want to tell you about my little journey. I've had this little journey through Lent. So I've kind of done Lent the most deliberately that I've ever done it. And I'm not a big sort of, Lent history sort of person, because I'm not from a traditional church background, sort of we're a vineyard and not so much a traditional church. But beautifully and wonderfully, I mean, it's come into general awareness in the church, and I think it's just such a great addition. And so for those who've been doing some Lent stuff, it's great. So we've been preaching around the whole thing of Lent for the last 6 or 7 Sundays, and so you will have heard that term. And I kicked it off at the beginning of February. Various people, thank you for those who have been speaking, Ian last week, and Paulina for pulling things together while we've been away and stuff like that. And so, but I've been on this, I've dived into Lent. So for the first time ever, I fasted a bit during Lent, deliberately sort of, withdrew from things and tried to go a little deeper. I did a daily devotional, literally daily and literally every day, right up until today. Did it again this morning. And so just kind of and I tried to feel it and be in it, and to be in this process of Lent with the idea, and as I quoted on that first service that we did, the guy Fulton Sheen, who said, unless there is Good Friday in your life, there can be no Easter Sunday. So I was like, God, I want to kind of, experience something of what happens before, so that when I come here to worship on Easter Sunday morning, there's something of a release of the things that have happened. And so that's been something in my journey. And I want to give you a couple of reflections from that time. And I do it not that I think these are great sermon points and that these are great things that you need to think or whatever, but I do it because I want to encourage you towards the journey of being and connecting with Jesus. We can't do Lent literally again until early next year, but we can always begin a journey of discovering that smoldering molten ball that's coming over the horizon, which is the power of God that raised Jesus from the dead, and we get to experience it, and we get to be part of that. I mean, how good's that? How important's that? How wonderful is that? And so I thought about this thing as, Paul's thing in 1 Corinthians 15, that if Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, we are to be pitied among all people. So if we're sitting here today and Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, my goodness, we're wasting our time. And we've probably wasted most of our lives, to be perfectly honest, because I've been doing this for a good long time. What a waste. But if he is raised from the dead, and I believe he is raised from the dead, if he is raised from the dead, then it changes everything. We cannot be passive to a Jesus who's raised from the dead, to a tomb that is genuinely empty. You can't kind of say, well, yeah, that's kind of good, but other great things have happened in history, It's like, this is the life-changing moment. This is the time that everything changes. It changes my relationship with you. If he is raised from the dead, we get to walk this walk together. We get to figure things out together. We get to work at things together. It means I don't have an option of living in the present without an eternity being part of what I'm in and what I'm thinking and what I'm part of, because he is raised from the dead. It's like I can't just neutralize any of those things along the way. And so resurrection takes me through the doubts and fears that I have in my life, through the jealousies and frustrations I have in my life. Resurrection is the basis of my hope. It's the basis of my joy. It's the basis of my expectation. Resurrection changes everything. And so I've gone kind of deep into this thinking of what does it mean for Jesus to be resurrected, for the tomb to be empty. The other thing that I did, and it was particularly in connection with Luke 24, because you could do this, I had this little experience of going through the senses, like, the 5 senses, and thinking, are they there? I don't know why I did that. I sort of did that on the plane or something like that. And I'm reading Luke chapter 24. And I'm thinking there are smells in Luke 24 as the spices come in. And you think of the smells that they were going to intermingle with the beginning of the decay of a body. And yet they were beautiful, and there was kind of the burial ritual and stuff. And yet the smells, which were beautiful, were not in any way polluted, I guess, by the decay of the body, because the body wasn't there, but the smells were there in the tomb, and the women carried it, and I found that quite powerful and incredible. So smell, sight, the sight of Jesus walking around. Can you believe? I mean, we've all lost people at different times. Can you believe that the person we just saw died is now with us again? I mean, how incredible is that? And all those sightings, and the touching of the hands, kind of the literal touching of this body, this resurrected body, whatever that kind of looked like. And then the sound of the resurrection, of worship, kind of verse 52, and they worshipped and they went out with joy. And the taste of the resurrection, breaking bread with Jesus. And we're going to conclude today's service with having communion together, a breaking of bread with Jesus. And maybe, just maybe, some of our eyes might be opened in the process. I mean, what a time it is to be a believer, Easter Sunday, because he is risen. He is risen indeed. So how do we live the resurrection today? That was sort of our thing, living in the resurrection. What does it mean to live in the resurrection? And I want to just make some points around the whole idea of living free, the freedom that Jesus gives us in the resurrection. And before I start that, what I want to do is I want to encourage you. I've got, I think, 5 things that I'm thinking about of being living free. And what I want to encourage you is to finish the sentence for yourself. So I'll give you my sentences, but finish the sentence for yourself. So if that was your ambition out of being here, and so, for Annabelle and Isaac, this might be one of those moments, kind of what does it mean to live free because of Jesus? How important that might be. So you might pick up mine, but hopefully you even think of your own things that Jesus might be speaking to you. So I think we get to live free because the last enemy is defeated. The last enemy is defeated. So in 1 Corinthians 15, it says, "For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive." And then verse 26, the one that really grabs me, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. I love this sort of sense because we often talk about sin, don't we? Kind of Jesus died to save us for our sin. And it's all absolutely right. Save us for our sin. Just a wonderful, wonderful thing. But the last enemy to be defeated is death. And so we get to live free because that last enemy, the enemy of death, is defeated. So even though we face this literal death, we know in the resurrection that death is defeated. Death is defeated. And we get to be eternal. And how amazing is that? How, kind of you can't be neutral around that. So as I say, we've been in Nagasaki, and in Nagasaki, most people would know Nagasaki is where the second atom bomb went off in 1945. So, but Nagasaki is also kind of perhaps the most Christian of the Japanese cities, and a lot of mission happened in there. But also there's been a lot of martyrdom, there's been a lot of oppression over the years. And I think it was in 1597, the emperor wanted to crush Christianity really and make an exhibition. And it is famous, at least in the city and maybe throughout Japan, of the 26 martyrs. The 26 martyrs who were marched from Kyoto, which was about a month-long march, to Nagasaki, and they were crucified in Nagasaki, and they become sort of the emblem, in a sense, of a lot of oppression that happened over that time. It's talked about quite freely, it's not a hidden thing. And I was thinking about this, and it's like my friends Matt and Andrea here today who work with oppressed believers in other countries. That's their ministry and their mission. Talk to them later if you're fascinated by that. And it's like, if Jesus only defeated sin, which is an amazing thing, I'm not sure that the martyrs, in a sense, kind of would have had the freedom that they seem to have to take their faith to the cross. But they died believing that Jesus had defeated death. That death itself was not the end, but that they would live, and to be an inspiration for us today. And so this whole idea of living free because the last enemy has been defeated, we don't have to worry so much in a sense about aging or kind of whatever we've done. We get to celebrate the things that Jesus has done in our life. And I just think that's an incredible thing to process and think about. I think we get to live free in the certainty that we are loved. The empty tomb, the cross, the Jesus being is the opportunity to know we're loved. And John picks it up. He says, God is love. And he says, and this the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his Son into the world so that we might live through him. The love of God is a certainty. It's a certainty that we can live in. And I mean, maybe for you today, this is the message of Easter. The empty tomb shows the love of God and the love of God for you in your messiness, in your, kind of whatever it might be. And the opportunity of knowing and growing in those things is something that we can be with as we are celebrating this Easter Sunday and indeed this Easter weekend. I think it gives us the opportunity to live free even when we suffer. I don't think the empty tomb means we don't suffer. In fact, that hasn't been my experience, and I don't actually see many people around here. I know some of your stories really well who haven't had the experience of suffering. Martin Luther picked this up when he said suffering is intolerable if you're not sure of your salvation. We only get to suffer well because we know of the empty tomb. Otherwise, it's intolerable, Luther would tell us, because there's this sense of futility, but there's also this sense when we get to know those things of the resurrection as the hope of the resurrection within that. Or we get to live free in the kingdom that is coming among us. The kingdom is kind of ushered in, and its power comes from the power of the empty tomb, or the same power that God of the empty tomb. And I love Luke 12:32 because I don't know really Jesus' tone, but here's what I think his tone is, or for me, this is what it is. It's, fear not, little Vic. Fatherly, loving, brotherly, loving, arm around the shoulder, loving. Fear not, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Why can I be confident about that? Because of the empty tomb. We get the opportunity to live free in the kingdom coming among us. And then I think we get the opportunity to live free with eternity in our veins, pumping through our veins. We live so much of our life thinking I'm going to get my 70, kind of my 70 years, or maybe now it's sort of our 85 years or whatever it is, and and then in a sense we die. But there's a sense where that's just so linear, and it's understandable because that's the only dimension in a sense that we can live in. But we get to live with eternity in our veins. And I love Tim Keller when he talks about this, and he comes up with some interesting ideas in this. But listen to this. The resurrection is the restoration of what you've lost. You don't just get your body back. You get the body that you always wanted but you never had. You don't just get your life back. You get the life that you always wanted but you never had. You know that what the resurrection is. Jesus is walking proof that you will miss nothing. There's going to be a wedding feast, real wine, real arms. It'll be your wedding feast. The resurrection means you're going to miss nothing, nothing. It's all coming in the future. It's going to be unimaginably wonderful. Resurrection is a promise and an invitation for us to live with eternity pumping through ourselves. This is who we are. This is our expectation. This is where we're going to go. This is what we know, and this is what we believe. And if we don't believe it, or if we believe it and we're wrong, we're the most to be pitied. But if we don't believe it, in a sense, we've kind of missed the point of the thing that we're doing. And so Easter Sunday becomes the time where we get to celebrate again, sing those songs. Thank you, Moz, of resurrection and power and knowing the power of God. And so what I just want to do as we come towards a close today is to invite you to think about how you would finish the sentence. To live free. I get the opportunity to live free. And what would Jesus say to you? What would be the freedom that he wants you to experience and to know? And so I'm just going to, allow a little quiet in that process for reflection. It could be something that I have said. It could be something that you've thought about during Lent. It could be that you haven't thought in any way about that, which is absolutely fine. But it's an invitation for you to take a personal thought away and to be able to process that. So God, would you come and just speak to us about how we might live free in the context of an empty tomb? And so I bless you. I bless you to live free. Not in a wild or hedonistic sort of way, but in an empty tomb, Jesus has come sort of way. And Lord, I thank you that as we ponder and process, even as we forget and do our own thing, that you will be close and draw near. In Jesus' name. So let's stand, and Moz and the team are going to come back. And kind of when they saw the risen Jesus, their response was inevitable, that they would worship. So let's stand. We're just going to worship again. Our children are going to come back, I think, at some stage during the song. Each of us has our own journey, And I've been big on my journey to share because I've only got my journey to share. But there is an invitation of God to each of us today to follow some of those things. And there may be some prompts there. It might be in your living free idea, or it might be Jesus' invitation to touch me and see. It might be in this whole idea of inviting Jesus into your home, fork in the road type thing. And sort of Jesus is actually going this way, but it's saying, hey, night's coming, why don't you come? And why don't you eat and drink with me? The inevitability at the end of the day is worship, is to let worship arise in our hearts. And so we're just going to sing one of our songs again, or sort of half of our song in relation to resurrection, and then I'll come and pray and we'll come and have communion together. So thank you, Moz.
On the third at break of dawn, the Son of Heaven rose again. Oh, trample death, where is your sting? The angels roar for Christ the King. shall return in robes of white. The blazing sun shall pierce the night, and I will rise among the saints, my gaze transfixed on Jesus' face. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God, we will sing yes. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. We sing. Oh Lord our God. We'll sing.
Yeah. So I want to encourage you to come, and our kids have come in, and obviously their context is slightly different, so if your kids are with you, but I want to encourage you to come for communion with something. And my suggestion is with something that Jesus might be saying to you in our service today, something that you've heard, but something with a heart. So not just because we do communion sort of relatively often, and this is a breaking bread with Jesus. This is an opportunity for our eyes to be opened and to meet and to know. And we get to sort of, mix and mingle dozens of journeys, and we bump shoulders, and we sort of look each other in the eye or a bit awkwardly at our feet or something like that when we see each other. And we get this great mixture of journeys and the sense of what God is doing in different people's hearts and lives. So why don't you come on up, and when we sort of seems like we're finished, I'll close the service in prayer. So come and grab our emblems of Jesus' body and blood, and then we will eat and drink together, Let's hold it, and we'll eat and drink together. Come on up.